thank you all so much for joining us this morning. We will have Chairwoman Raquel Teran, House Minority Leader Reginald Bolding, Senate Minority Leader Rebecca Rios speaking today with some prepared remarks. Afterwards, we will be able to take some questions. Feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box at that throughout the meeting, and we will get to them at the end. Mark, yes, absolutely feel free to record and use this as a well. With that, Chairwoman Teran, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you to the team for putting this press conference together. And of course, many thanks to Leader Bolding and Leader Rios for joining us this morning. We all know that in the past weeks, we've learned the terrible lengths that Republicans have gone to deny Arizona's voices and President Biden's rightful victory in our state. President Trump, Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, Kelli Ward, all reportedly tried to intimidate and interfere with Maricopa County supervisors. Fortunately, Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, Congressman Ruben Gallego, the Arizona Republic Editorial Board have called for Attorney General Brnovich to investigate this matter. As our Attorney General, Mark Brnovich must do what's right. Listen to these officials and open an investigation. From this reported election interference to the sham audit, which remains covered in mystery and which, as we learned yesterday through the sham hearing, seems to have no end in sight. These politically motivated attacks on our democracy continue on with zero accountability from the Republican elected leaders. So they only sow distrust and give oxygen to lies and conspiracy theories. So it's time for Attorney General Brnovich to do his job and open an investigation. So our second speaker is Leader Bolding, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Teran. One of the things that's extremely important is that we know that Attorney General Brnovich claims that he's someone who will hold Republicans and Democrats accountable. And earlier in his tenure as Attorney General, we saw much of that. But right now, that theory is really being put to test in a major way. The evidence reported is clear that members of his own party, both nationally and right here in Arizona, have conducted illegal and horrific behavior that threatens our democracy. If ever there was a time for Attorney General Brnovich to stand up to his own party, to do what's right, now would be that time, regardless of any political cost. And I understand the pressure he's under as a U.S. Senate candidate. But as the AZ Republic editorial remarked, if President Biden and Democratic leaders acted the way Republicans did, Brnovich would most certainly have already begun investigating their behavior. And it's extremely important because this really means that what we need to do is we need to hold those accountable who have been in positions of power to actually use that power. And if Brnovich really means what he says about his commitment to the law over partisanship, then he should prove that right now and at this time. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Senate Minority Leader Rebecca Rios.
Leader, you're muted.
Good morning. Thank you, Leader Bolding. I think the fact of the matter is that Brnovich has previously stood up for election integrity. His silence now that he's running for Senate shows that he's folding for President Trump. It's important to remember that Brnovich played a role in defending Arizona's elections immediately following the 2020 election. He, in fact, was the first statewide Republican elected official who acknowledged that President Biden had won and certified the election. He even went on TV to dismiss claims of voter fraud. But now that he's running for the Senate, he's silent, even as we uncover this terrible evidence of interference. Trump is clearly playing a major role in this primary, and Brnovich's refusal to investigate shows that he's already folded for Trump. His silence is especially dangerous as Arizona Republicans use lies about the election to fuel this sham of an audit, which has continued partisan conspiracies that threaten our democracy. Unless Brnovich agrees to investigate, there is no conclusion that we can draw upon other than the fact that he doesn't care about Trump's reported election interference. Brnovich political calculations are showing, and Arizonans are sadly getting a front row view of Brnovich selling them out and abandoning his principles by staying silent. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Chairwoman Teran, Leader Bolding, Leader Rios. If there's any questions from the press, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box and or feel free to raise your hand. Any questions here for our speakers today? Mr. Phillips, second, let me just give you the floor. Mr. Phillips, you're free to unmute and ask your question.
Hi to you all. Thanks for letting me talk to you. Just curious, have any of you, either individually or collectively, contacted Attorney General Brnovich and asked him specifically to launch an investigation?
I have not. And I have no doubt that any request coming from Democrats at this point would largely be ignored.
Anybody else? Then I guess the next point is, other than this, what can you do?
You know, it's extremely important right now that, you know, elected leaders who've been put in positions of authority, they act on that authority. And the reality is that we've seen investigations launched for far less. We've seen inquiries for far less. But what we're now seeing specifically is illegal behavior that absolutely will threaten our democracy. And when you get to that point, there becomes an oath that you take that will require you to stand up. And I think it's incumbent upon our citizens here in this state, but also broadly, it's incumbent upon our elected leaders to really begin to hold each other accountable, because again, our democracy is so sacred. And no matter what issues we care about, no matter what office someone is running for, if we don't have a democracy, that's all for naught.
And Mark, I agree with what Leader Bolding is saying. At the end of the day, we have the state of Arizona that is still dominated by Republicans, from the governor to the AG to the House to the Senate. And at the end of the day, I think it's important that we let Arizona families know exactly what these folks are doing, the lack of accountability on their part. And unfortunately, at some points, that is the extent of what we can do, right? Is to ensure that everybody is aware of what these folks are doing, what they're not willing to do, and hopefully that level of accountability, holding them accountable, is not only Democratic elected officials, but Arizona voters across the state.
And what I would add to that is that, you know, through this sham audit for the last 6 months, we've been calling to the circus and the lack of transparency. But Secretary of State Katie Hobbs sent a letter to Attorney General Mark Brnovich asking him to investigate. He declined to do so. So there is record that us as elected officials, and obviously the secretary speaks for her office, but she is our highest ranking election official in the state of Arizona. And yet he declined to investigate. So it's important, it's imperative that he takes on this investigation right now, because at the end of the day, this is not about Democrats, this is not about Republicans, this is about every single voter in the state of Arizona. And Mark Brnovich has done absolutely nothing to stop this sham audit.
I just want to add, I think it's a sad day for democracy when you see elected officials like Brnovich that are clearly playing to their own political animal instincts of wanting to be elected at all costs and not willing to do the job that they're currently elected to do, again, because they want to be elected to another office. And I think that's the point at which Arizonans need to recognize that this person who's not willing to do what he's been elected to do currently, he just wants to switch to another job, and he's willing to placate a radical right base to get there. And that truly is a sad day for Arizona, a sad day for democracy, but unfortunately, it is where we are at right now in Arizona.
Okay.
I'm going to step in here and just pick up a couple questions here in the chat. We have from Mr. Gordon, any comment on the House of Representatives investigating the audit?
I am grateful. It is unfortunate that this ridiculousness has permeated itself on a national level, where we've seen essentially this carnival sideshow now taking hold in Georgia, in Pennsylvania. And so, yes, it is absolutely imperative that Congress hold hearings and attempt to stop this ridiculousness, because unfortunately, it is permeating across the country. And again, with the intent of undermining our democracy, raising doubt about the elections. And I truly believe these folks would love to continue this narrative up until the next election. And so I'm grateful and hopeful about investigations at the national level.
Just jumping in with another question from Stephanie. On both this matter and the Senate audit, have you been in contact with the state senator or representatives or the DOJ?
So one of the things that we've seen is that even recently, at the federal level, investigations are ongoing and underway. I mean, the reality is across this country, people understand that the audit that is being conducted, and it is very hard to call this an audit because that somehow legitimizes this process. And we all knew that when this process began, that at the end would not be a group of individuals with a partisan agenda. We knew that they would not say everything checked out. Everything's perfect. The election was well ran. We knew that. And what we saw yesterday just confirmed what we already knew. But this was an exercise to fundraise from both national and local individuals. This is also an effort to create a narrative to somehow call in elections in question in the future, because we know that the public has said that they want candidates that speak to their values. And what we've consistently seen is our Republicans, instead of changing their message, they've tried to change voters or change the process. And we know that's not American, that's not democracy.
Fantastic. Just to get to another question from Chairwoman, did you want to speak? I saw you come off mute.
No, I was reading the question.
Got it. Brooke asks, can someone comment on the House committee demand for documents from the group Cyber Ninjas leading the audit? Do you think this is another reason for Brnovich to get involved, or do you think this would give him a reason to not investigate?
I think there are sufficient reasons for him to investigate, and all the eyes are in Arizona, like I said earlier, we are talking about the sanctity of our vote, of our elections, and that is a reason for him to investigate. We need all hands on deck to stop this sham audit. And I do want to remind people that the so-called, cyber ninjas, or I mean, that is the name of their organization, had zero experience on election audit, but they also wanted to conduct everything in the dark. They didn't want to provide procedures. They didn't want to have the media there. You all know it. In order for the media to be there, they needed to volunteer. That was way at the beginning. We had to sue. We had to sue as the Arizona Democratic Party to get these procedures, these manuals in place, open to the public. Then the Secretary of State, as well as the media coalition, also joined on this lawsuit, and that's how we were able to have some transparency. But there are still many questions, and absolutely, Attorney General Mark Brnovich has a duty to Arizonans, to Maricopa voters, to ensure that there is an investigation.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Nope. Okay. Oh. We'll move on to the last question in the chat so far. We've got Barbara asking, how do you feel about the DOJ's response so far?
Look, I mean, at this point, one thing that's clear is that investigations need to take place, but even more than investigations, we need to just move past these attempts to somehow call into question what we already know is a free, fair, and secure election. The reality is, no matter what happens with the DOJ or responses from other leaders calling on this audit to stop, calling on investigations to occur, the reality is this is all taking place because it is politically motivated and driven based on the fact that a candidate that was supported by Republicans in this state lost an election. And there is now an attempt to cause deep-seated dysfunction in a system because there is fear that some of these same candidates may lose again in the future. And we know Arizona is smarter than that. They understand what's going on. And quite frankly, we believe that this will have implications, political implications, that many who are using this rhetoric to damage our democracy, it will have political implications on their futures.
Leader, Chair, would you like to comment on that?
I think that was a good wrap on that.
Great.
Thank you.
Mr. Phillips, I saw you had your hand raised. I didn't know if you had another question or that was from last.
Oh, no, but since I got the mic, I'm not taping this. So could you send me a copy of this when you're done?
Absolutely, yeah. We can follow up with you and any reporters who want a recording of this.
Thanks.
All right, any other questions from anybody else? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Okay, we've got a question from Stephanie. Are there any regrets that Democrats didn't work at all with the Senate president so that you could have some voice in the Senate audit?
I'll take that. Where to begin? This was a unilateral decision by President Fan. This did not go through the regular hearing process in a judiciary committee where Democrats would have been able to ask questions, to have a true bipartisan discussion. So, make no mistake, this was a unilateral decision by President Fan and presumably some other Republicans behind the scenes. Because of the FOIA request by the media, we now see that she jumped on this immediately, right? Somebody had emailed her, hey, what about this idea? And her response was, and then bragging about calls from Trump and Giuliani. So unfortunately, Democrats were not ever a part of making this decision. In fact, unfortunately, we had to work through the party and others, and this is an issue that has ended up being played out in court. The one thing that Democrats were not willing to do was be a party to this circus sideshow and any attempts to legitimize this. I mean, this has been wholly dysfunctional. And again, Democrats had no say in whether or not this audit was going to proceed.
Perfectly said, Leader Rios. This sham audit was absolutely an attempt to suffice the small, vocal group of people that believe this election was stolen. And Senator Fan caved to those conspiracy theories. And us as a party could not give legitimacy to this sham audit. But we have to remind the public that there were 2 elections, legal elections, that went through the whole process with 100% accuracy, and that was not sufficient. This sham audit is not going to be sufficient for those people who believe this election was stolen. And if they try to have another one, that one will not be sufficient. So at the end of the day, this is to create uncertainty in our election or our democratic process. And it's very unfortunate. But we're going to continue to organize regardless of all this uncertainty that these individuals have created. And it began with the leadership of Senate President Fan and the lack of leadership of Mark Bonovich.
Thank you. I just want to add, I mean, Representative Teran is absolutely correct. There were 2 audits as prescribed by law that were conducted by the Maricopa County, Elections Department, overseen by the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. That is all Republican, with, the exception of Supervisor Gallardo. The current, Maricopa County Elections Director, a Republican. These folks have all said, enough is enough. There was no fraud. There was no evidence whatsoever of any fraud. So I think this speaks to the fact that regardless of what is ever said, there is a radical right-wing element of Republicans that is never going to take anything less than, yes, President Trump should be president. And at some point, we just need to stop engaging with this craziness. But the sad fact is it's taking foot, right? It's spreading like a cancer. And so it is time for elected officials to do their job. It is time for Brnovich to stand up and do the job that he was elected for and not just campaign for another job.
All right. Thank you so much. Leader Bolding had to jump off. So with that, we're going to, Mr. Phillips, did you have one question? I just want to wrap up here. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to email them to Sarah Guggenheimer. You can find her email in the invite. I will also just drop it here in the chat. Good measure. If you are wanting to follow up with her for a recording of today's press conference. Let's finish that up. There we go. Sarah Guggenheimer at azdem.org. And with that, thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Thank you, Chair Teran, Leader Rios, and Leader Bolding for helping for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks.